again from Green Island. One of the subjects I am most commonly asked about when people visit the gardens is acers. They fall in love with their Japanese maples. I'm passionate about them, and I daren't admit to how many different varieties I actually have growing in the gardens. And often people will buy one to put in their garden, and I know that really it's not going to succeed because they haven't got the correct soil. If you haven't got a moist but well-drained soil, it doesn't need to be acidic. That is a myth about growing acers, but moist and well-drained. So if you've got heavy clay, an acer will not grow for you. And if it's dry, sandy soil that dries out in the summer, it won't thrive either. But don't fear, because they grow really, really well in pots, and they can be equally rewarding grown in that way, even in a small garden. This beautiful acer here, I grew this one originally in a pot until it got too big for the pot, and then we moved it out. Beautiful yellow leaves, and then colouring red. You can see just about to go red for the autumn. But now I'm going to show you some of the other acers that I've got growing in pots, and you can see the variety of different types we can grow. So this one is also an Acer shirasawanum, but it's called Moonrise. This one has coloured, if you like, prematurely because it's growing in the pot. But we've had this beautiful red colour all summer in the pot, so it really, really is a stunner. Beautiful yellow leaves when it comes into leaf in the spring, tinged with red edges, but then, as I say, going red for the, well, this one has done all through the summer. These are quite upright growing ones, the shirasawanum varieties. And now I'm going to show you a slightly different shape of acer. So this one is completely different. This is Acer palmatum. It's called Shana. It's a much smaller growing variety, and you can see the leaves are quite tiny, but they are red right throughout the whole year. This one's been in this pot now for about 5 years, and I'll talk a little bit more about the pot, but you can see that the pot fits the size of the plant. What you don't want to do with an acer is plunge a small plant into a very large pot, because effectively you will put it into a load of wet compost that's not, the roots are not taking up all the compost, and it will rot during the winter. Similarly, you don't want to keep it in too smaller pots, because then it will be prone to drying out periodically. So it's really important to match the size of the pot with the plant, or the root ball of the plant. So if you purchase an acer in a nursery and take it home and put it into a pot, try and pot it up one size bigger each time you do it, every 6 months or every 12 months, every year. Once they get to this size, it can be kept for many years in the same size of pot, and if it really does outgrow it, it's possible to take it out in the spring and root prune. So take off a portion of the roots and then plant it back in the same pot, but with a portion of fresh compost for it, and that will give it a boost for the year. People often ask me about the compost I used for acers in pots. I just tend to use a general multi-purpose compost, and they colour beautifully for me. If you prefer, you can use an ericaceous compost. Acers will colour better in acidic soil. It's a myth that they need acidic soil to grow well. They will grow equally well in a neutral or a neutral soil. But if they have an acidic soil, they will colour slightly better. The other thing is about positioning them. When you're growing an acer in a pot, the pot is going to be more prone to drying out, obviously, than if the root ball was in the soil. So I would avoid positioning them in full sun all through the day. I would stay a position with part shade, so either morning or afternoon sun. You do need some sun on them in order to make them colour well, because an acer, or in fact any plant that's grown for its leaf colour, will not colour as well if you grow it in the shade. So give it some sunshine, but don't expose it to the baking full sun right throughout the summer. Similarly, in the winter, if we have a really, really wet spell, when the acer has no leaves on it, they've all fallen off, make sure the pot isn't allowed to sit too wet. So if there's a prolonged period of heavy rain, just pull it under the eaves or put it somewhere sheltered for a few weeks, just so the compost doesn't get too wet. And then the other thing is about feeding and pruning. I don't tend to feed my acers in pots. I did try it one year after so many people had asked me what I fed them with, and I gave, in fact it was this acer, a handful of bone meal in the spring, and the growth on it that year was as much as it had done in the previous 10, which was lovely if you want your acer to get bigger. But actually I like them to stay in the pots long term. So effectively, if you don't feed them, it sort of causes them to do a bonsai effect, keeping them artificially smaller. But having said that, they will still attain a really good size in the pot for you. So this one is Acer palmatum atripurpureum dissectum. Dissectum because the leaves are very finely divided. And the thing that all the dissectum varieties have in common is that they grow in this dome shape. So it makes a nice spreading, low growing shrub. Tend to be slow growing as well, the dissectum ones, so it does make them particularly suitable for a pot. And if you've got a collection of acers, it's nice to have contrasting shapes. So this one or any dissectum one will make a nice rounded spreading weeping shrub for you. This one is Acer japonicum aconitifolium, so a different variety again. You can see beautiful shaped divided leaves on here. This actual tree came from us in our first home in London in a pot. It started life in a pot and I grew it for many years there, and when it finally outgrew the pot, I planted it into the soil here to make a lovely specimen, which it has done. But you can see it's been here now for over 22 years. And it hasn't made too big a tree, but it's a beautiful focal point. The leaves have been this lovely reddish colour virtually all summer, and they will go bright scarlet red before they drop in about a month's time, month and a half. So a really good variety to choose, again perfect for growing in a pot. So this is another Acer shirasawanum variety. This one's aureum or gold. And all the shirasawanums tend to form quite an upright, slender shrub, very slow growing. But the other thing about these, they tend to be yellow, lime green leaved in the spring and summer, and they have the greatest tendency to scorch. So I'd say if you choose one of these varieties, they're absolutely beautiful, but put it in a shaded position. They do colour beautifully in the autumn. You can see this one. As with Moonrise, it's just starting to colour here, and I would say that actually these colour in pots much better than they do in the ground. But again, if you want to grow one of these, choose a shaded spot for it, otherwise the leaves will scorch. And here we have a different shaped Acer. This is straight Acer palmatum orange dream, so it's one of the palmatum cultivars. These form nice, upright, slightly more spreading shaped trees than the shirasawanums, but generally they can tolerate a lot more sun than those. This one has bright yellowy orange leaves all through the summer, and then you can see this one already just starting to colour. Again, these are colouring slightly earlier because they're growing in pots than they would do if they're in the ground. But basically you can't go wrong with a Japanese maple. Plant it in a pot and you will have 12 months of interest. Even when they haven't got their leaves on, they still have the most beautiful, graceful silhouettes, even covered in snow or in the middle of winter with just frost on them. They make absolutely beautiful specimens. Low maintenance, they don't need any pruning, feeding. What more could you want from your pot plants?